chief strategist at Citi, has spoken about in his recent notes is that the Indian government's thrust, both in the budget and outside the budget, to go ahead with highway and road construction could be a major trigger in fomenting more growth, in perhaps triggering more economic activity. To check out what exactly is the government's position on this and what are the plans, Vijay Chibber, the Roads Secretary, has joined us. Satish Chandra, Director of Finance at NHAI, and Mr. VD Mhaiskar, the Chairman Managing Director of IRB Infra, have joined us. Gentlemen, good morning and thank you very much for joining us. Well, without wasting any time, Aditya, why don't you start this conversation?
Sure, thanks Lata, and good morning everyone. Mr. Chibber, I'd like to really start with you. We've seen a lot of emphasis from the government in terms of the road sector. Targets have been high, expectations have been high. But in terms of numbers, there's still a certain amount of wait and watch in terms of roads that have got constructed, roads that have effectively been tendered out. So it would be great if you could give us some sense of, some of the activity that is going on in the ministry and how you see this entire road push actually playing out over the medium to long term.
Well, I think the numbers speak for themselves. Last year we had awarded about 8,000 crores, 8,000 kilometers of roads, and that itself was a fairly substantive number. This year we've set out to award about 10,000 kilometers of road, and up to July we have already awarded a little over 3,100 kilometers. So I think the numbers really speak for themselves. The grand strategy really is that we award at least 10 to 12,000 kilometers every year going forward, and therefore the outputs in terms of completed roads would be 10 to 12,000 kilometers of completed roads with a lag of 2.5 to 3 years, because that's typically what it takes to build a road stretch. The second part would be the total infusion of money into the economy through the road sector. Last year this was around 55,000 crores, and this year we anticipate that the total spend, both public and private, would be little in excess of 1 lakh crores. So, and this momentum would get even further developed as we go into the next fiscal. So I think broadly the road sector is back on a roll, and it is going to play a meaningful role in getting the economy back on its feet.
Okay. Well, if I might come in here, Mr. Satish Chandra, you all are planning some changes in the model concession agreement. Now, already some of those guys who had projects and were stuck for getting their own equity were allowed to bring their equity on a deferred plan. Are you going to give some more concessions to existing players? And what are the changes you are envisaging for prospective bids?
Hello.
Mr. Chandra.
Hello. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. No, I just wanted to know, you gave some concessions to... If you can hear me? Can you hear me, Mr. Chandra?
You are barely audible. Please be louder.
Okay. Well, I was asking whether you all are giving more concessions to existing players who have won road contracts. You allowed them to bring their premiums a little later. You deferred it. Are you giving them any more concessions? And are you giving more, what concessions are you planning for prospective bidders?
No, ma'am, I haven't heard you properly, but
okay.
I think you are asking about BOT projects.
Well, I'll do one thing. We'll fix that audio and come back to you, Mr. Chandra, in a minute. Mr. Chibber, if you could answer that, please.
Yes, actually, quite a few policy initiatives have been introduced already, and some more are on the anvil. I think what you were referring to was rescheduling of the premium that is payable to government. That has been not only approved, but now it's been put into play, and quite a few projects have benefited on that account. In this architecture, what is payable to government is deferred, and to that extent really it adds a little comfort to the lenders so that they can pull out their money at an earlier stage. So this policy is through. The second policy initiative was equity exit. This relates to the projects awarded before 2009. In the MCAs before 2009, a part of the equity was locked in for the life of the project. We have now brought these projects at par with the post-2009 MCA, which allows equity exit after 2 years from completion. So to that extent, there could be a bigger churn in the equity that is already into the existing roads. We are also looking at further tweaking in terms of one-time infusion of money by NHAI has been permitted for the BOT toll projects. This, of course, would be subject to the existing lenders having comfort with this arrangement. We are also seeking currently a mandate from CCEA that this one-time infusion could also be permitted for annuity projects, because annuity would become payable to these projects once they are completed. And there is a relative comfort that we can recover our money which is pumped into these semi-constructed projects. In addition, we are also looking at few further policy initiatives whereby we compensate the builders for any delays that have occurred on account of the authority. Namely, if there is a delay in land acquisition and that has resulted in delaying the project, we should find a way to compensate the builders. So these policy initiatives, I think, are finding traction, and we are hopeful that the languishing projects, there were over 73 languishing projects, we would be able to get them around, either by rebidding them or by getting them back onto their feet.
Okay, Mr. Chibber, just one follow-up question. You know, for this magnitude of ordering that you mentioned, about 10,000 kilometers in FY16, a large chunk of land needs to be acquired. And you just spoke about the land acquisition issues that NHAI has been suffering with for a long time. Have any of these land acquisition hurdles been cleared? And if you can give us any indication of, how much land has been acquired so far?
The land acquisition bill, that is the 2013 bill, the Act, that itself has actually provided the stimulus for increased land acquisition by making the compensations far more lucrative than they were in the past. So we believe that notwithstanding the difficulties that are that exist because of the consultation process and the rehabilitation aspects of the Act, the fact that substantial step up in the compensation, the monetary compensation, is provided for under the new Act, this itself should help us get the land acquisition process fast-tracked.
Okay. Aditya, any questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chibber, if I might add one more, which is in terms of the push to EPC contracts vis-a-vis the PPP model that had been followed previously. And I believe a lot of the newer contracts have been on an EPC kind of format. How do you look at it from an economics perspective to start with, and from a longer term perspective, do you see a transition back to the PPP model, given that at the end of the day, to the exchequer, that is what probably works best? If it functions well?
Well, there are two ways of looking at this. Firstly, the roads have to be built, so really it doesn't matter what mode of delivery you adopt. But I think where we went wrong in the past was to insist that the BOT toll would be the default mode, and only when that default mode does not perform would we shift then to the annuity and then on to the EPC in a waterfall mechanism. I think this was philosophically a wrong approach. What we are now adopting is, I think, a more practical approach where we actually analyze each project as a standalone activity, and I then see whether it would be best to build this through a BOT toll or an annuity or a EPC mode. So there's no sort of straight-jacketed kind of structure. It's a case-to-case kind of analysis. Last year, yes, it's a fact that we had gone heavily on EPC. Out of the 8,000 odd kilometers awarded, hardly 650 kilometers were awarded on BOT toll. But this year I can see the beginnings of a turnaround. In fact, in the first 3 months, we've awarded about 800 kilometers, little in excess of 800 kilometers on BOT toll. So really, the sense I'm getting is that BOT toll is going to continue to play an important, is going to be continuing to be a part of the portfolio. I think the markets will respond better if we bring the projects after due preparation and after getting all regulatory clearances. And I think that's really the key going forward. And that's also probably the reason, or the main reason why some of the projects were in distress over the last 2-3 years.
Mr. Satish Chandra, can you tell us what are the main contours of the new model concession agreement?
Like hybrid annuity?
Yes. Any other?
Hybrid annuity, we propose to award about 700 kilometers by November, December in the current year. And as per this model, basically 40% of the cost will be contributed by NHAI during the construction period. And remaining 60% would be paid to the party during the remaining 10 years through annuities. And the tolling would be done by NHAI.
Okay.
So the concession is totally risk-free.
Okay, fair enough.
The risk is taken by the authority.
Okay, let's get Mr. Mhaiskar into this conversation as well. Mr. Mhaiskar, Mr. Chibber just spoke about the BOT toll revenues. For you as well, in the quarter gone by, most of your large projects have seen double-digit growth, and you've seen very strong BOT toll revenues. What is the future for IRB Infra in terms of growth? Do you think this growth that you've reported in the quarters gone by can sustain?
Very good morning. I think for the growth prospects, we see very good growth in the volume to continue. What has happened is really the sector and the particular tariff model has a hedge in itself. And when you have a very high inflation, your growth usually falters and vice versa. So we today are seeing a negative WPI and a double-digit volume growth. So typically what it ends happening is the revenues that one would have projected in the range of 10 to 12% revenue growth, the mix of that has now changed. It is more coming from the volume rather than increase in the tariff, because the tariff today is not going to go up because of a kind of a deflation that we have seen. So the projects being in highly economic zones certainly has helped to keep the volume growth going. And after the last 1 year's euphoria in terms of the turnaround and the volume story picking up, we will be now on a very high volume base, and sustaining that will really be the challenge going forward. And for that, I think the project geographies will play a very big role, because tariff is not going to help much this year. Although if crude comes back and if inflation picks up next year, we don't know how it will look. But at least for a reasonable time to come, we see the tariff to remain muted and the growth to contribute to the revenues.
Okay. Yeah, Aditya.
Yeah, Mr. Mhaiskar, good morning. One of the questions I had was that, as Mr. Chibber mentioned the fact that there's much more ordering and tendering that has effectively happened. From your perspective as a participant, what is your sense in terms of the ground reality? Are you seeing business effectively come through? Are you seeing projects which are much more comprehensive in the way they are being put out? And are you seeing amongst your peer set and your competitors an element of competitive bidding or at least enthusiasm that had drifted away in the recent years?
I would like to totally compliment Roads Secretary and member NHAI for the host of reforms that they have really taken and worked hard on in the last 1 year, which has really helped the sector to come back. And as he rightly said, we are again back driving at a better pace than what we were a couple of years back. And I think this whole host of reforms that they have done, whether it was deferment of premium, whether there was bringing back the mix of BOT and EPC, both kind of projects, enabling for developers to pick up BOT while the EPC contractors could go back to doing EPC, or it was on the land front. I think phenomenal work has been done by the government. And I am quite sure that over the period of next 2 years, we are going to see phenomenal growth in the road sector. I think a whole host of things are happening on the ground, and I think we are very clearly seeing the fruits of that.
Okay. Mr. Chibber, and I wanted Mr. Satish Chandra also on this. You know, you've done only 3,000 out of the proposed 10,000, and we're already almost, 5 months into the financial year. What's the breakup? I mean, how much in the next quarter? For instance, this September quarter itself, will you put out some bids? December quarter, March quarter, what's the breakup, Mr. Chibber?
No, it's not that if the target is 10,000 for the year, that every month you shall get an X. You know, projects are planned, and then we make the grand plan of 10,000 kilometers, depending upon the planning that has gone on in the previous 2 years. So, firstly, this figure of 3,100 kilometers is for the first 4 months. It's not for the first 5 months. If you want the figures as on date, it will be about 4,000 kilometers that have been awarded.
Okay.
So I think we are bang on target. We are quite confident that we shall achieve the award target. A lot of hard work and preparatory work has gone into this. You know, the road construction activity actually typically picks up more in the second half of the year. And so you would get a sense of where we are actually sometime around December, January.
Okay. And actually, as Aditya was also saying, it all depends on how much the government spends. And very often there are unspent amounts at the end of the financial year. Mr. Satish Chandra, what's your sense? How much will NHAI spend this year, and how will you compare it to last year?
Last year we spent about 23,000 crores.
Okay.
And this year our budget is for 72,000 crores.
How much have you already spent?
So far we have spent about 17,000 crores.
Okay.
All right, gentlemen, we'll have to leave it at that. Thank you all for joining us and throwing a lot of light on the situation as far as the road sector is concerned. There's been quite a bit of improvement. So this time in FY16, 10,000 kilometers of roads will be awarded. Your final call on how do you approach this sector and the stocks to look at?
The 72,000 crore is quite exhilarating.
Yeah, the numbers are big. I mean, we've seen them big picture, but now we are in some senses getting it from the horse's mouth. So I think that's big. I think from a participant, we are getting the sense that there's actually a lot happening. So I would actually be, you know, fairly optimistic that you're going to get fairly consistent, steady and predictable growth. You know, do remember roads has two elements to it. One, it has a massive multiplier. Secondly, it is most visible. So from a political perspective also, the more road activity that you have, the more tailwind you effectively get. So I think it's important in that context.
In your list of India top picks, are you going back now and adding any more construction companies?
You know, I mean, that's a wide lot, and the company-specific call is different from a sector-specific call. But clearly, we do believe that this is a sector that needs to kick in.
And
I think you're seeing signs. I mean, from a stock perspective, I think there are different elements to go into it. As a stock at the moment, we are not.
Okay.
But we are actually been very, very impressed by the traffic growth. You raised that question. I think if you start seeing volume growth of 10 to 12 to 15% on traffic, I think that is a significant sign of the economy at the underlying level tending to buzz and actually happen. So I think
last year, this time, Mhaiskar was telling us there was contraction of traffic.
Absolutely.
So this is like a huge swing.
I mean, the problems are different now. From a revenue side, suddenly you don't have the inflation support for pricing.
Yep.
But the sign of an economy beginning to show life is actually traffic growth going up. And I think that is actually a big, big positive.
And that's something that IRB has seen in the last
A, they have seen. B, I think it's going to incentivize the bidding also. You know, it becomes very challenging. One of the problems with the road sector has been that effectively there have been no bidders given their exposures and their problems. With volume numbers like this, I think there's just going to be a much more positive assessment as far as bidders and contractors are concerned of that space. And if anything, it'll actually precipitate the spend.
Multiplier effect.
All right, if you have more roads, you will have more cars. So when we come back on the other side of the break, joining